Today I'm going to show you how to add some texture to a piece of metal. There are lots of choices and I'm going to give you a sort of broad range so that you can make some decisions on your own. But when you first think about your piece, hopefully you have a plan. You know if you are going to be draping a bead down over the front of it or if the piece itself will become the focal point. And if you are planning to put a bead in front of it, then there's no point in doing a special stamp or something in the middle of your metal because it's not going to be visible behind the bead. On the other hand, if I'm not putting a bead in front of it and this piece of metal will be the focal point, I may want to plan something special happening in the front so that the piece has a nice focal point. But with any piece that you're about to texture, your first concern is the perimeter. You need to alter the perimeter so that it has a less of a flat and dull look. If you can bevel the edges, it'll look more attractive. The light will move off of it, and that also helps get some interest in the piece itself. Just like you would bezel or bevel the edge of a jewel, it makes the light reflect off of it. And that's one of the things that I do look for when I grade your pieces, is if you've done some kind of treatment to the outside. So there's some examples of how to do this. I'm going to first use the ball peen hammer. I'm going to hit into the side to kind of make a little dent. You can see the light is dancing off that now, and it's not dancing off the other sides. I could also use the chasing hammer that has a little bit of a smaller tip. I don't know if you can see the difference between that and the other side. Not very much, but a little bit. You could also run down the edge of it with something like the edge of your chasing hammer. That almost gives it like a little bit of a stitched effect. And you can also use the edge of the rivet hammer the same way. Lots of different effects you can achieve. Now, for the sake of interest on this one, I'm also going to texture the background of it a little bit. When you get a piece of jewelry that says it's hammered metal or hammered silver, that usually means that someone's taken the hammer to it. And it probably means they've done that to it over and over again on the whole piece. Now, notice I'm hammering on the metal block. If you do this on the table, you will not get results. It's too mushy, it's too bouncy. You need something very sturdy beneath your piece to be able to hammer and make effects. I would also like to use a textured hammer to show you what that's like. Again, there are many different surfaces to choose from in the textured hammers. One of my favorites is this one. It just makes a nice little swirl. But you have to hit it really hard, and you have to kind of get it right the first time. You can't just hit it and get in the same mark again. So when texturizing like this, it's going to make a pattern, but you wouldn't want one of these marks in each of the four corners of your square. That would look awkward. It's better to have 3 or 5 of something. You can see that made some nice swirl marks on it, and this is definitely something that's going to work out best as a background piece. I better be planning to hang something over the top of this. But I would probably even texture a little bit more. Now sometimes as I'm working with my piece, the edges might be curling up a little bit. You can flip it over. Use your nylon hammer so it doesn't make any marks. Or I could start pounding it on my rubber hammer. Okay, those 2 ways to flatten it back out again if you're having some distortion issues. Now I don't know if you can see, but I got a little bit of a hammer mark right there that actually distorted the edge of my rectangle or my square. If you don't like that, then you'd have to file that off with a file or find a way to make that smooth again. Also, by adding your texture to the perimeter, sometimes you can make a sharp edge. Be certain that your edges feel nice and soft. You don't want to snag somebody's nice blouse or nice sweater because you had a rough piece on the end. If I wanted to make this look even more rustic, I could probably also trim off these corners just a little bit if I wanted to get just a little bit of a less square look. And then again, check those because now they're pretty sharp and I would have to sand those down. Now let's say for the sake of argument, on this one I'm not going to have a bead. I would begin to hammer around my perimeter first. I would probably use one of these hammers for a nice little beveled edge around the edge. And in this case, I'm going to put a stamp as my center of my focal element here, and I don't want to have a lot of stuff going on if the stamp won't show up. So I'm not going to add any overall texture with this yet. Let's wait and see how it turns out. So here I would go to my little stamps that are in this dish. I have lots to choose from, a little curly cloud, but I like this little daisy stamp. So I'm going to line it up. I tend to try and look straight down on it from above, and that way you're sure you've got it dead center. You can even make a mark on it with a Sharpie first, and the Sharpie will come off later to plan your spot. With a stamp like this, you get one chance. If you don't do it perfect, you cannot hit it a second time with the hammer. You've got to get it right. And I don't know, folks, if you've ever hammered anything before, like a nail, but you don't look here. You're going to look up here. Trust you have it in the right spot and keep your focus on here. Hit one good. Okay, that was pretty good. You can see I got a little flower right in the middle there. Now, if I wanted, I could add some interest. A few more dents maybe around it. And that'll work. Another nice way to produce some texture is to take a paper clip, bend it in a way that you think is going to look the way you want. It's also one of the only ways to get a longer straight line. But let's say I wanted like a curly, like leaf tendril to kind of go with my flower. Bend that the way that you want it. Lay it down on your piece. And then you can hit it super hard and you'll get a little impression. Now it only works for a couple of hits before you've got to redo it and use another piece of paper clip, but that can have a really cool effect too. And it gives you a little more flexibility, something that you don't normally have. Another thing you might want to consider on your metal is to get a word in there. And if you're going to use the letter stamps, you definitely want to practice first. Right behind me in that drawer is pieces of mat board that you're going to be using for matting your final pieces of jewelry. And you're going to look for scraps in there. This is not a scrap. This is actually a pretty good sized piece, but you're going to want a scrap piece that you can use to practice your letters in. So I'm going to practice the word hope. You want to get a sense of where the top of the letter starts and where the bottom of the letter is, so you can see that it's lined up. Now that was actually a little bit crooked, so good to know for the H. I got to watch my crookedness. The O I want to be right next to it. Line it up. O. It went downhill a little bit, so I know I got to be careful of that. There's my P, and stamping it out first always makes sure that you get the P instead of the B or some wrong letter. There's the P. I got back uphill on that one a little bit. And there's the E, making sure it's right side up. And there's the E. So I've learned some things about where each letter looks like it's right side up versus upside down, and I can get a better idea. So let's do it in the metal. Again, you get one chance, and it has to be exactly right the first time. You cannot redo it. So you want to make sure you get it. Now I'm going to have a hole here, so I'm going to start my word a little bit down farther so that it doesn't interfere with that. I get one shot. There's the H. Not too bad. O. O is next. I want it right next to it. I remember last time I got it too low, so I'm going to get it up a little higher, see if that solves the problem. O. Now I also got it a little far away, so I got to be careful with my P and my E here. There's my P. I'm going to run out of space. I hope not. There's my P, but I am running out of space, unfortunately. And in a case like this, I'm probably not going to give you another piece of metal. You're going to have to make do with the mistakes that you have and try to get along the best you can with it. Now maybe I can use something around the border of this. I can trim off the edges of it to make it not look like it's so much off center, but I'll make this work. And I'm going to ask you to do the same. It's so easy to make a stamping mistake that if I gave people new metal every single time they had a stamping mistake, we wouldn't have any left. So that's if you want to do some stamps. Once you have your piece textured, Sometimes you can give it a little more depth, a little more character by giving it a little bit of bend, and we call that dapping. So for example, this square piece might look really nice if it had a little bit of bend to it. So I'm going to use the wooden dapping block, and each circle is a different depth as well, so you have to decide how much of a dap you want. And I want this to be kind of shallow, so I'm actually going to choose I think this one over here. So I'm going to lay my piece in there, textured side down, take my dapping rod, and I'm going to begin around the outside edges. I don't want to make a wrinkle. Just gently tapping a little bit, not all at once on one side, but just little by little, around and around and around, until it finally sinks down. Okay, when it's all done, I have this nicely bent piece. You can imagine how this would look really nice on a circular piece of metal if I was going to curve it for over a wrist, something like that. So that's just a really nice way to get a little bend in your pieces, and I recommend that. You probably are also thinking about the tube dapping block, and let's say I wanted to make this toggle sort of charm, and I want it to be sort of bent over. This would look really pretty too if it had a piece of copper riveted over top of it, but for now I just wanted to have a slight bend. So I'm going to pick the size of the bend that I want, I think in here. But my hammer might not fit perfectly down in the diameter of those particular tubes. So I'm going to have to use these dapping rods. You see they come in all sizes to match what you're doing. So I think that one looks pretty good, and I'm going to try dapping that in there. Again, I'm going to use my ball peen hammer, just kind of get it started. So let's go a little more shallow for now. And that has a nice rounded look, which I think is a little more attractive and can make a more interesting piece. Okay. So that's how you use your dapping sets. We've covered texture hammers, we've covered using something around the border, and there are lots of considerations. Once you've got everything textured the way you want it and it's pretty much done, now you're ready to decide how you want to patina it, what kind of finish to put on it, and that'll be a next lesson.